Did I see Bryce?
Who was?
at the end.
Yeah, he went down. I nodded at him as you were getting your stuff. Yeah, there it is. Good evening and welcome to the City Council Finance Committee meeting of Thursday, September 21st, 2023. 4 items on the agenda. The first of these is the introduction of Forvis LLC, auditors for the City of Norman. I assume that's you.
This is Clint Mercer, our chief accountant. I will let him introduce our field auditors from Forvis.
This is Joel Hosser and Kirsty Morrison.
I remember last time.
Yeah. She got married. Did I get the
You
right
did, you did.
And just know that we just reestablished our contract with Forvis, so they'll be here for another at least 3 years and up to 5
Excellent.
before we have to do another RFP.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Anthony. Appreciate you guys and appreciate your opportunity to come and speak to you. I'll keep it really brief. Your attached is just our pre-audit letter. Used to be a letter, now it's a PowerPoint slide about just kind of our responsibilities for the audit and the upcoming audit. If you want to, probably we'll just go through it real quick. I won't go through it in great detail, but page 3 of the slides will tell you a little about the standards and everything that we follow. So in brief, the auditing standards that we follow are both come down from the AICPA, which is our self-governing kind of body, and this is part of the governmental auditing standards. So the single audit and the regular audit also have to be reported to the federal government for the grants. So we follow both those standards. They're both pretty parallel with each other. And on top of that, we set some of the other information to provide you is we don't audit every transaction. We set scopes at various levels based on risk. Those are proprietary. Management doesn't know what those are. We don't tell them what those are. And so if those transactions are above that amount, then there's a good likelihood that we're going to perform in-depth procedures on those. So talks a little bit about the scope. Page 6 is kind of the next section I wanted to talk about. So with the Finance Committee and the way the understanding works is if we do find error that we classify as significant, so a significant deficiency or material weakness, we're required to communicate that to the Finance Committee. If we find fraud with senior management or anybody there, we go to the Audit Committee, Finance Committee first, just to make you aware of those issues. We've identified a couple of areas of
If I may
significant.
interrupt, I would say
Sure.
that under federal law, we have to have an audit committee.
Sure.
And so here in Norman, our finance committee of the council serves as the audit committee.
Excellent. And then with the hiring of this new internal auditor, how's that going to interface?
Really doesn't have any direct relationship. There can obviously be some projects that the internal auditor works on that they would get advice or work with our external auditor, but there's no formal tie between the two.
Excellent.
Which is very common. It's not unique at all. So we're available to help the internal auditor if they need us. We don't rely on their work other than just asking questions. So, yeah, very good question. Some of the significant risks that I wanted to highlight, there's 2 main ones that really encompass every audit. So the risk of management of override of controls. So the mayor, city manager, city finance director just tells people to do stuff. We always pay attention to that and look for those areas. The other one is improper revenue recognition. So with the amount of grant funds that you receive, your bond offerings, those types of deals, we always consider that to be a significant risk. Revenue's always risky. And then on top of that, we also consider a lot of your accrued liabilities as risks. So that's about the timing. So what your accounts payable, what you owe other vendors, your bond offerings. There's some significant estimates involved in financial statements. So the pension plans have a significant estimate component. Your other post-employment benefit plans have a significant component to them. And so we do focus more on those areas than areas of less risk, is really what those are. So other than that, those are the three riskiest areas that we always pay attention to. Another thing to point out is there's a couple of new accounting standards that become effective this year. So some background, the city follows the Governmental Accounting Standards Board's pronouncements, which is a governing body, so to speak. They're not tied in with the federal government. They're an oversight, self-oversight board. But they establish those accounting policies and procedures that need to be followed. They have issued three new statements that become effective for this year. Two of them probably won't have a big impact. One of them will. So GASB State 91 is the first one to mention. It's around conduit debt obligations, which the city does not have. Those are where you have like your industrial revenue bonds. So a lot of times if a governmental organization cannot issue debt by itself, it may contract with Oklahoma County Finance Authority is probably the most common. They issue the debt, so it's tax exempt. If you do have those, then they've changed some of the way those get accounted for. You don't have nothing to worry about there. The next one, GASB Statement number 94. This one we'll have to pay attention to, just watching the news and other things and trying to keep abreast on things. If you go into a partnership with, I know the stadium is one of the discussion topics. When you get into those arrangements, you have to look for, probably the most common is parking, for example. So if the city owns a parking garage or the city is involved with a parking facility and uses a third-party operator to operate that, there's what are called public-private partnerships, and it really governs how the revenue and the assets get recorded. There's a lot of arrangements in those, so they've changed the way some of those are recorded. Typically, the city has not had any of those, but we'll pay attention to those just to see. With the change in the lease standards last year, this has gotten a little bit more focus because as the auditors were going through a lot of the lease standards, it was like, oh, this is really a partnership, not necessarily a lease. So we'll pay attention there, but I don't think it's going to heavily impact the city.
Probably not this year, but next year we will. We do, when we're opening the Adult Wellness Center, we'll contract.
Okay.
So it'll come into play then.
So any publicly funded facility that we build, but we contract out to operate, so the libraries fall under that too?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. See, because the library is operated by a public entity.
Right, yeah.
So I don't know how that works. I was thinking more about the Sooner Theater and the Firehouse Art Museum. Much smaller operations, but they are owned by the city and operated by third parties. So,
Okay.
so those are things we will have to be.
And the Young Family Center, we were going to contract out,
Right.
but now we're operating.
Nah,
in-house,
okay.
so- Okay.
Yeah, we'll look at those. There's really two standards that govern these. This one specifically, the 94, is where you get into more of a financial arrangement where you may not be financing the whole thing. You may contract with a third party that's also going to help finance it, and you're going to split those revenues between the two of them.
And I guess we're not paying sorry, Mayor.
You're all right.
I guess we're not paying the public library system to operate there.
No.
We
Well,
don't have we
should
built the
provide
building.
cash
We
go
built the
that way.
building and they operate it, and they have a public, property tax revenue source that's operated, but again, I don't know the answer to that. That's something we'll have to be.
Good question. Yeah. Very good. So, yeah, we'll look at those and see if there's anything that implicates. Again, it's a really complicated standard, but it doesn't always apply to certain arrangements. So we'll take a look. The next one, and the one that's probably going to have the biggest impact this year, is GASB Statement number 96. And we refer to these as SPEDAs, lots of different acronyms, but really what this is an extension of the lease standard that got implemented last year. So the lease standard was focused on if you lease property, lease a tangible asset. The subscription-based information technology arrangements is this year's task, and really what those are intangible, the cloud computing type software. So if your general ledger system, you contract with a third party to use their software for a 5-year period. Used to be you didn't record that as a capital asset. Now they're saying you need to record that as a capital asset, similar to a lease standard. So it's going to be a little harder to go through all those because leases are a little bit more obvious that this is the arrangement. With the cloud computing and subscription-based services, they're a little more hidden because you just don't have that tangible property to look at. And so that becomes effective this year. We've already had to implement it on a couple other cities. It was actually effective for year-end 12/31s, but since you guys are 6/30, we've had a couple go-rounds of what to look for just on some 12/31 year-end, so that will help. But those are the new standards, biggest impact. The next list, just so you guys are aware, I put these in here, they're not a big deal, but we have auditing standards that we have to follow. So kind of going back to the standards that we follow, there's a list of several that have become effective that we have to follow that just cause an increase in different areas that we have to pay attention to. So like, for example, audit evidence. One of the areas that has really gotten interesting is back in the old days, I say the old days, you'd send a paper confirmation out. Somebody would sign it, send it back to you. That's what we had. Now with technology, things are electronic. You may not have an actual signature to look at. It may be a timestamp, all different kinds of things. So they've updated the standards for those types of things that we need to follow. So yeah, it never changes. I guess the last thing that I wanted to mention were a lot of the common areas we get asked about is what is our consideration for fraud. Big topic usually. There's a list back here that if you ever want to read, it'll kind of tell you what we do. But some of the main things, we have a team meeting before the audit starts where even the lowest staff and interns are involved, and we just talk about risk areas, things we need to look at, what's going on at the city, read news articles, read the minutes, just to kind of get an idea of where could fraud take place. That's where the internal audit piece comes in handy because we'll interview the internal auditor to see what projects they have been looking through and what they've done on their own plan. So we'll do inquiries, interviews with certain key management. We look at the accounting estimates for bias. That's probably one of the most common. Whether or not that's fraud or an error, that's a little bit harder to pin down, but it's an area that we look at. And then if you're into business, we evaluate the business rationale for certain transactions to make sure there's not a related party issue, there's below the market, under the table type stuff. And so we really keen on that. We actually set materiality because, again, we don't audit every transaction, but when it comes to related parties and cities, it's not uncommon for a city to be in a transaction with a related party. Typically, it always cracks me up because in accounting, in general, related party transaction, there's no materiality. You're supposed to disclose and identify every single related party because that's an issue. When you're working with the city, a lot of times you require your police officers and different employees of the city to live in the city who are also going to contract with water and other processes. So you're going to have a lot of related party transactions in a city anyway, just by its nature. So we don't focus on those. We set a materiality for ones that really you would care about, those types of things. So those have to be disclosed in the financial statements, but we'll take a look at those. And last thing I wanted to mention, there is a list and detailed explanation of all the accounting standards coming into play, as well as the auditing standards, about 20 pages worth. So if you really get bored or you're just,
I'll be sure to read it.
yeah, I can't fall asleep one night, pull these things out and start reading. But that's really the extent. We just like to put it here in case anybody's ever wondering. So,
Well, they do come in handy because you do get asked questions sometimes and somebody will be speaking in shorthand and they go, I don't know what that is. And
We
I can
do.
at least do it without having to answer my hand up.
and accountants love to use acronyms like a lot of other professions. They become second nature. So don't ever, if we say an acronym that you don't understand, it is okay to say, wait a minute, what does that mean? And we need to tell you. It's not a dumb question. But again, we're excited, looking forward to it. And if you ever have any questions or need to reach out to us, we will be happy to answer those.
Well, thank you both. And congratulations on the marriage. Thank you. Hope it lasts forever.
Mayor.
Oh, yes, sir.
So it would seem to me that in a city this size, that fraud would be relatively difficult to pull off because there's so many eyes on it. But also, on the other hand, it's so a big operation, so maybe things are easy to hide that are smaller. But I feel like when I read about fraud or embezzlement with municipal governments, it's generally smaller towns where there's no.
Correct.
And like where, because I'm all, like when I see something about a city council member like did it, I'm like, I don't know how I would even do that. I don't have like an expense account here, and I don't.
See, and that's an interesting point you make,
very.
because in smaller towns, you might have one person doing a lot of different jobs that are separated here. I just recently had a discussion with a person who just didn't understand or didn't agree with our concept of separation of duty, where I don't have the combination to our vault. I'm the finance director. But I have the signature authority over the documents that are in the vault, so I don't believe that I should have the physical custody of those documents. Then I could just go in there, get it, sign it, and cash it. So you separate those things. In a smaller town, you might have one person who has the custodial access to the vault, has the signature authority, makes the deposits at the bank, all of those things are in one hand, and that's where you get in trouble.
Absolutely. And that, he's referencing kind of the internal control structure, which is what we go through in our analysis to say, is this a small city? Do you have proper segregation of duties? Yeah, so no, you're very, very correct. Usually in towns of this size, most common fraud that we see or hear about is through the purchasing department. And a lot of times it is, especially nowadays with the internet, if you don't have a centralized receiving area, it gets very hard to manage everything getting ordered from all the various vendors that are getting shipped all over the city. That's usually the most common. Somebody is buying it for personal gain, or they don't really need it, they're buying it and selling it. That's probably the most common that we see, just in cities of this size is what we focus on. That's why the liability section is so big, for our audits.
I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
no.
When I was
very
at
good
streets, we
question.
used to always watch how many shovels, how many hammers, how many everything, because they get lost, and it's just amazing what you can lose just in operations, and nobody was ever stealing anything, I thought.
Yeah, right.
$40,000 hammer,
Yeah, well,
$1 toilet seat.
but the admin techs that take care of a lot of that, like Patsy, would dog you down. Where's the receipt?
That's
And
what
where's
you
the
need, yep.
So, yes, ma'am. So,
Yeah, no, very, very good question.
Appreciate you guys.
well, thank you.
Thank you.
Clint, may I get another one of those so I can give it to Councilmember Montoya, please?
You betcha.
Thank you, sir. Wait a minute.
Even more than you wanted. Well, thank you again, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, item number 2, discussion regarding the FYE 2023 budget closeout.
So where we are now in the process, as you just heard, is that we have closed the books for fiscal year that ended June 30th of 2023. And what you see here is just a couple of the funds of the city that I wanted to highlight where we closed fiscal year '23. So the biggest fund of the city is the general fund, and what you see here in column A is when we adopted the budget where we thought we would end the fiscal year, and in column B, where we, after closing the books, where we actually were for those various revenue and expenditure sources. You see that we were real close to budget for sales tax. We were a bit below budget on use tax. We're about $400,000 short of where we thought we would be for use tax. Our franchise fee revenue was up by about $1.3 million. And again, that was because it was such a cold winter. We had really good natural gas revenue. I often say to this committee that as it relates to franchise fees, drought is good, and freezing weather is good. On line 9 there, this committee over the years, most recent years, when interest rates were really low, gave me a really hard time because we were short of our investment revenues. I'm the city's investment officer, and I just wanted to point out that we're above budget for investment revenue.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't think I ever got on due for that.
No, you didn't. Castleberry was brutal, though. So at the bottom line, you see there on line 30, our total revenue was really close to budget. We were about $600,000 below our budget, and on $106 million worth of revenue. That's really good. On the expenditure side, our salary and benefit category of expenditure was about $4 million over where we thought we would be. We kind of knew that was coming. It had to do with unbudgeted pay raises and a lot of hiring that we did over the course of the fiscal year. So that's kind of coming out. We had below budget and below expected expenditures for salary and materials and service and maintenance. That's a good thing. Our managers in the various departments continue to do a really good job of trying to stay within their budgets. The big reduction that you see there on line 37 for capital equipment, that is where we were budgeting to buy vehicles, dump trucks and what have you during the course of the year, and delivery is really slow on those things. So we have not spent as much as we thought we would. Dropping down there to line 64, we have ordered those things. So when we order the equipment, there is an encumbrance for them. So that's where you see a really high number for that reserve for encumbrance, where we have encumbered the vehicles or equipment that has been ordered, but they've not come in yet. So we've not actually spent the money yet, we've but obligated to spend it. So at the very bottom line there on line 62, you see that we thought we would end the year with a fund balance of $19.6 million, and we actually ended with a fund balance of $19.5 million. Again, we did a really good job of budgeting, and that's to a lot of folks' credit. We have $10.9 million above our minimum fund balance, and again, that gives council some flexibility to do some one-time things, and you have been doing that to a really great, to your credit.
Is that the surplus?
That's the
Number
surplus,
19 million?
Yes. No, the 19 million is not the surplus.
10.
The 10.9
That's
is,
current today.
yeah, as of June 30th, yes, that's actual. The next fund that I wanted to highlight is the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. Again, the fund is okay. It's better off at the end of the fiscal year than we thought we would be, but that is basically because the Emergency Communications and Operations Center is delayed. And you see that on line 25, where we thought we were going to have spent $6.6 million last fiscal year, and we're well below that. So where you see an actual fund balance of $7.7 million in the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, that sounds really good, but it ain't so. On line 43, there's $2.7 million of encumbrances and $7.3 million that is bond proceeds that can only be used towards building that ECOC building. So really, in reality, the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund is in a negative position for its own operations of $2.3 million. That's on line 45. When we were discussing the other day about adding those additional 4 school resource officers, that's why I was saying that would really be coming out of the general fund.
Yes, sir.
The Public Safety Sales Tax Fund is not in a position to fund that.
So we are still experiencing really good sales tax revenue historically. And all the PSST, Norman Forward, Transit, all those funds are
Benefiting from that.
benefiting from it. But even with that, PSST is still
Yes, sir.
How long does that tax keep going?
The public safety sales, it's permanent.
Oh, it is
Remember
at a
the
permanent rate.
It was
2015 vote was made.
temporary for 7 years, but when we renewed it permanently. I
How do
had,
you amend that to raise that number? Apparently that number's at 0.5%, am I
Yes, sir.
correct? And that 0.5%,
If you wanted to raise the rate, that would be a different vote, but you could certainly do that. I mean,
but would that end up being a tax on it, a tax added to a tax? So we do leave the 0.5% and then put another quarter on there or
yes,
something like that?
then you'd have 0.75% for public safety.
But it'd just be two individual.
Or it could be one. That's just an accounting question, how you would account for it. But for example, if you wanted to have 1/4% and dedicated it for some certain thing, you might set up a different fund for that, or you would certainly set up a different line item within the public safety sales tax fund or ultimately in the general fund to account for that 1/4%, and then separately account for whatever operations you said you're going to use that for. So again, that's an accounting question, but we would certainly, you know,
Definitely don't want to write a ballot question where you jeopardize the PSST we have in place. I think that's what you're asking too. And so we'd be careful about how that's drafted as an additional percentage and not revoting essentially what has
yeah,
already been approved.
I'd be viewing it as we'd be voting to increase it, the existing rate
Right.
is how I would,
Scary messing with Mother Nature. I'll tell you.
Okay.
a couple of other things I just wanted to highlight. I did not print out these funds, but I did want to point out that the rainy day fund is $714,000 above its minimum level and about $236,000 below its targeted level. The rainy day fund ordinance requires council at the time that the audit has been adopted by the council to make a decision about whether you want to make a deposit or, you know, we've never appropriated money out of it, but whether, for example, you wanted to bring it to its targeted level. And that comes in January at the Finance Committee meeting in January. The Public Transit Fund, last fiscal year had a subsidy of $1.295 million. Again, that's really good. That's kind of where we thought we were spending money before the city took over the operation. The general fund was subsidizing to about that same level. So it's being operated pretty well and efficiently.
That's only because of the on-demand program.
Yes, sir.
Otherwise, transit would be, if I recall, wouldn't have
wouldn't-
needed a
that's-
subsidy if we weren't doing that.
Right.
Okay.
University North Park TIF has a fund balance of about $10.8 million at the close of last fiscal year. That money is spoken for. About $5 million for the lifestyle center incentives, about $4 million for the road improvements on Tecumseh and Flood, and about $1.5 million of remaining economic development incentive money, basically for Emmy.
And our, okay to speak freely, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So our, the deal that we made to end the TIF early, that $5 million incentive, if I recall, if it isn't used by 26,
31.
that was before then. If it isn't
Well,
used by
the
then,
walkable, you know.
then that 5 million would go back to the general fund.
I
That was,
believe the project plan says if it's not used by the deadline, and I don't remember what the deadline is off the top of my head, that it could be used for other project costs. At the end of the TIF, then it could go back to the taxing jurisdictions, whichever's left. So
Well, I thought-
whatever amount is left in accordance with the local development act.
recalled that $5 million incentive being a key part of that deal we struck, where if nothing comes forward that is unique and walkable and all that stuff by what I recall being 2026, then we get that $5 million.
Under the local development act, any funds that aren't spent in a TIF have to go back to the taxing jurisdictions in the same way they were received. So you would get back whatever was attributable to sales tax, and then the ad valorem tax would go back to the taxing jurisdictions. But I can pull that language and send it to you.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that.
And finally, the Center City TIF fund has about $2.7 million fund balance waiting for projects.
2.7.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
That's really all I have as of highlights of where we closed last fiscal year, but again, we're maintaining, we're doing pretty well. Council's making very good decisions about the excess fund balance and what you might do with that. Again, we would strongly encourage that you only use that for one-time expenditures, capital things and that sort of thing, but it is a healthy position to be in.
Wonderful. Okay. Item number 3, you ready to go then? Discussion regarding FYE 2025 budget calendar.
I recognize Kim Kaufman, our budget manager, to speak about that. And again, I thought it was just me, but, 2025 sounds so far off. I mean, but it's really not. We're at the start of the budget process for the fiscal year that will end June 30th of 2025.
I feel like we're coming full circle because we just talked about the audit, which talks about what we've done, where we've been, and we're currently in fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, trying to execute the plan that we set out in that budget document. And right now, I'm going to go over the plan for the budget process for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025, which sounds crazy. So in your packet, there's a budget calendar for that fiscal year. Today's the official beginning of the budget process for fiscal year ending 2025. It is a multi-month process. When you all hopefully approve this calendar today, it'll set in place this long process. This is like 90% of my job right here. But in November, we're going to get a list of fleet rankings from the fleet department on all of our vehicles. And they're going to look at, problems and the age of the vehicles, a lot of different things that they evaluate. November 21st, we're going to have our first council study session on the capital budget. And then November 24th, the IT department will sort of rank all of our computer equipment and put together a list of recommended replacements for those. December 1st, I'm going to have a little presentation for city staff. The budget kickoff is what we call it. I'm going to go over the process with them and all the forms that we're going to use for their budget requests. And then on December 8th, the fleet department's going to send out their ranked list of vehicle replacements to the individual departments. Those departments will then need to submit their their vehicle requests from that ranked list of replacements from fleet. They're going to submit their request to budget with all the things that they need on these replacement vehicles. And then in and then between December and January 31st, the departments are going to work on all of their budget requests, and they're going to submit them to budget by January 31st. At the beginning of January, the city manager is going to meet. The city manager and the finance director are going to start looking at the reserve and the budget policies. And the end of January, that's kind of like the hard cutoff for any changes to your base budget and all budget requests. And then once I receive all the budget requests from the departments, I will give the fleet division, HR department, and the IT department all of the requests that will impact them, and they'll start reviewing those for me. Beginning of February, we're also going to start looking at revenue projections. And then February 6th is our second council study session on the capital budget, also the midpoint evaluations for the capital improvement program proposals. We're going to start looking at fund summaries on February 12th, and then we have an important Finance Committee meeting on February 15th where we're going to look at mid-year amendments and adjustments, and that's also when we're going to go over the outside agency requests. February 19th, Fleet, HR, and IT need to get their recommendations back to me on their respective requests. And then on February 23, we've kind of changed it up a little bit this fiscal year, where we're going to have one due date for all the capital projects. And notice that is after the second council retreat on capital projects, so that council's ideas can be taken into consideration, and any projects that council wants us to submit can be reflected in the requests. February 26th, we're going to finish up the rest of the forms for the budget document. And then March 1st is very important. This is the day the sausage gets made. We have a management team budget retreat. When I get all the budget requests from all the different departments, I will put them in a big spreadsheet with all the different components for each request. And then on this day, March 1st, the department heads will sort of go through all the requests from their department, try to convince the other department heads why their requests are more important than everybody else's. Because remember, we only have a certain amount of capital sales tax that we have to spend. So that's kind of the target we work with on this day. And then each division head or department head, I apologize, will rank the requests that are submitted on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the most critical, 5 being probably not critical at all. And then I will prepare a ranked or a list of requests in ranked order for the city manager. And usually he'll take the department head's rankings into consideration when he decides what ultimately is going to be approved. So when y'all are at council meetings and people are saying, why didn't the city manager approve this? Well, he's taking into consideration, you know, his subject matter experts, all of his department heads, when they said, this is really more important than this. So that's what happens on March 1st. Then the city manager is going to start reviewing all of the funds. He's going to meet with the department heads and kind of go over their budgets for the current fiscal year and what they're asking for the next fiscal year. And then March 11th, finance is going to start putting all of the budget figures together. March 22nd, we're going to get final decisions from the city manager on all the budget requests. And then beginning April 9th, the preliminary budget document, city manager's proposed budget, is due to the print shop so we can get that printed for council and staff. And then our goal is to distribute it to council and staff on April 11th.
Before you move off of that, I wanted to point out that March date where Kim meets with the Norman Public Schools about the SRO costing. She knows more about that than anyone else. But where questions come up about the public schools are paying half, and I have always said half of what?
Yeah.
That's where the negotiating about the what. This guy that's, you know, this SRO that's working a basketball game and getting paid overtime for it, the school district paid for all of that overtime, didn't they? No, they didn't. Okay, so that's the sort of thing that goes into those negotiations, and it's more complicated than you may think.
Oh, I would imagine.
And that those negotiations are actually between the police department and the school district. I kind of provide my estimates to the police department, and then they work with the school district to come to an agreement. Let me see. April 16th is our third study session, but this is on an overview of the general fund and the special revenue fund, so general fund, Westwood Fund. And then April 23rd is our first public hearing at a council meeting. And I just want to point out, we used to only have one public hearing, which is all that's required by the Oklahoma Municipal Budget Act. But beginning in fiscal year 2020, the finance committee decided that it would be better, it would promote, you know, transparency and encourage public engagement if we had 2 public hearings. So since fiscal year 2020, we've had 2 every year. So that first public hearing is April 23rd. And then we have another study session for the capital funds on May 7th. We have a study session for the enterprise funds on May 21st, and then our second and final public budget hearing on May 28th. An optional council study date for June 4th if needed, and then the budget will be considered for adoption on June 11th. And then, of course, everyone will get the final books once adopted. So, are there any questions?
No questions, just a comment. So I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago with a number of other elected officials from across the country, and we were talking about budget type things and how the processes work differently in different communities. And it was astounding to me that there were a lot of communities that did not have opportunities for council to have as much input or to make amendments to proposed budgets. And so I want to say that based on what I've heard from other communities, like our budget process is very transparent. It is very, I would say, accessible in the way that a budget process can be. And so I appreciate that now we have a second public hearing, right? Adding opportunities for members of the public to get into the process, and, you know, just laying this out and being able to like present this to the community, like our budget starts in September. We're not waiting until April when we're having that first budget hearing with the community to, vet all of these things. Like, it is really pretty much as soon as the one budget is done, we are moving into the next budget cycle. And so I think we're really lucky to do the budget the way that we do and to have as much input and opportunity. And that council also has input and say and is a part of that budget process in ways that other communities don't have. And if I'm not mistaken, like our budget process has won praise
Yes, ma'am.
from across the country. So just want to keep reiterating that Norman is transparent in ways that many other communities are not, specifically with their budget
Extraordinarily so,
process.
there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
How many awards do you have on that wall? Like 25?
24.
24?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
We have the longest streak in Oklahoma by far, so.
Yeah.
Nice.
So just want to say thank you for all the work that y'all do. I know that it is a lot to get us all to the point of actually approving that budget each fiscal year. So
And oh, by the way, they're not up on the wall.
And there's like 60 of them.
When they put us, when they put us in the new building, they didn't want us to put holes in the wall. So we had to use that sticky stuff and it's not working. So,
yeah.
too weighty of an award.
yeah.
When you figure something out, there's a lot of blank white walls all over the development center that need something in them.
Yeah. Some awards would be a great.
Well, that'll
Yeah,
work.
shout out to the rooftops, I think.
Well, thank you, Kim.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Item number 4, discussion regarding monthly review and expenditure reports.
No, nothing real new to report there. I know Councilmember Holman likes to look at that, where we're, the inner city comparison that we do. And you see we're kind of in the middle. This most recent month and for the fiscal year, we're kind of in the bottom third, but certainly not the worst. And we'll continue to monitor things. I really don't have an explanation for a sales tax as a proxy for our economy as opposed to the other cities that we compare ourselves to. But again, as I have talked to my cohorts and in those other cities, they really don't know either. So all that we can do is just continue to monitor and report on how things are going. But if we continue with kind of flat, but flat at a high level, we'll be okay.
Yeah. Looks. At least the numbers look good.
Yeah, I had someone tell me this week, or I was reading an article recently that said Norman was getting left behind by Edmond and Moore.
Not sure that's true.
Definitely not true. And on top of the news about the UMP being the number one, revenue draw in the metro shopping center. But yeah, I do find it interesting that this graph, could we get the one that would have been the wrap-up of last year's? So we didn't have finance committee in
Last month.
July.
Yeah.
And so I guess the last, would have been the full one, I guess.
The full fiscal year.
To see how we finished the year compared to everybody for the
Sure.
full. Yeah. So I think that'd be interesting too. But yeah, I went back and looked at the that year over year comparison and how this one right here, and just still remarkable that it's down, but it's down again from historic highs. So
Yeah.
it's still significantly higher than where it was pre-2020, which is just remarkable. I don't know how to.
Well, I mean, to that point, I think it'd be really interesting, and not to make any more work for y'all, but like we have the bar graph that kind of gives us where we were, right, and we're coming off this historic high. The comparisons that we see from like the other communities are just based on a month by month. Like, do we have a bar graph comparing like where the other communities were? Like, were they also working off of record highs last year, or?
Mostly, yes.
So they're
Now,
continuing to expand, we're just
No,
slowing
the-
down.
really, the percentage is a better way to compare city to city, fluctuation-wise, because, again, the dollar amount in Midwest City is
Sure.
way less than than Norman. And the dollar amount in Oklahoma City is way more than Norman. So it's, the most useful comparison, I think, is really in those percentage
Yes,
changes.
so just to clarify too, that the percentage changes are based off, from each city is based off what they had the fiscal year.
same month.
Last year. Okay. Yeah, I just think like seeing the huge jump that we had last year, like it would be interesting to see, did other communities have the same huge jump that we had and then are continuing to build off of that? Because we're, I would say, a little bit flat, but not that that's a bad thing.
Yeah, no, we can.
It's just,
we
I'm
can give
interested
this
to see, this comparison saying like, oh, we're being left behind by, other communities. And it's like, well, are they increasing more this year because they increased less in previous years? Like, just kind of that, trying to understand for that narrative around, are we really being left behind or are we really maintaining?
And we have a different mix of businesses too than both of those places,
Yeah.
particularly more. And so it's hard to say what's,
Well, yeah, I'm not asking like what's driving it, just really to see like, mostly to dispel the rumor or this myth that we're not doing well and we're getting left behind.
That's,
Because I would argue that that's not the case based on
And
what we're
that there's-
seeing.
At least according to Visit Norman, that 60% of the revenue in the UMP is from outside visitors.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people are actively choosing to come to Norman to shop that don't live here.
yeah.
So that's good for us, right? We're getting those
It's
sales tax
wonderful.
dollars.
Dan's thing is other people's money, and I agree.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
makes sense.
OPM.
OPM.
Anything more for Mr. Francisco? Anything you guys want to discuss? All right, this is
What do
easy.
we need money for, or what need the money?
Yeah,
What
ready-
needs, that's gonna be a whole year long discussion. And then
Burning a hole in my pocket.
knives and guns are not allowed. So anyway, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony.